The year was 2002. Anthony Enrique Gignac had just gotten out of prison for impersonating a Saudi prince when his family took him to watch the Steven Spielberg film, Catch Me If You Can. The film tells the story of legendary con artist Frank Abagnale and his elaborate check forgery scheme, and is changed to becoming an FBI fraud specialist. After watching the movie, Gignac gave it a unique review that completely ignored the story's point. Gignac said, "I'm so much better than that guy." And just maybe, he was right. Before Gignac began impersonating Saudi royalty, he was an orphan child from Colombia named Jose Enrique Moreno. Gignac was born in 1970 during a tumultuous period in Colombia's history, the War on Drugs. The South American nation became a war zone between cartels and law enforcement. Gignac would have been forcibly enlisted into a cartel as a child soldier, if not for a couple in Michigan, the Gignacs, who adopted Moreno and his younger brother in 1977. The move to America changed Moreno in two significant ways. First is the wealth. Gignac had never seen so much money in one place. When Gignac and his brother first arrived, they supposedly ate like they were starving. Sadly, they probably were, and had been for most of their life. The second was the high status held by upper-class Americans. Gignac came from poverty and homelessness, so his perception of American culture was that of any other immigrant, a desire for something better, especially after seeing the rich of Colombia who towered over the lower classes in mountaintop mansions and sped by them in fancy sports cars. However, unlike most immigrants, Gignac's perception of status was warped from a very early age. Gignac believed that as long as he appeared wealthy and powerful to others, he could live the lifestyle of someone who actually is rich and powerful. In first grade, a 6-year-old Gignac told his classmates that his family owned a historic hotel. Then, in second grade, he told them his father was the famous actor, Dom DeLuise. Gignac's lies reached a new level of audacity when his mother received a call from a local car dealership informing her that her new Mercedes was ready for pickup. However, Mrs. Gignac did not order a Mercedes. Their family was not wealthy enough to afford such luxuries, a fact 11-year-old Gignac was well aware of. That is why he walked into the Mercedes dealership claiming to be a Saudi prince. He said his father planned to buy the young prince a brand new Mercedes for his birthday. The dealership believed Gignac's story and even allowed him to test drive a couple of cars before deciding on which car to buy for his big day. When the dealership realized something wasn't right with their latest sale, they contacted the sheriff. Gignac's youthful scam was exposed, leading to Mr. and Mrs. Gignac sending their son to therapy. However, therapy was ineffective, and Gignac continued to lie about his social status. His psyche was further disturbed when his adopted parents separated, with each parent taking a kid. Gignac could not handle being separated from his brother and ran away from home at 17. His first stop was at the home of an Arab family in Michigan. Gignac convinced them he was a Saudi prince who needed a place to stay, and to ensure they took him in, Gignac told the Arab family if they did not provide housing for their prince, they should expect a visit from the royal family's secret police. While staying with his compliant hosts, Gignac got caught impersonating a Saudi Arabian arms dealer and fled Michigan. From there, Gignac ended up in Los Angeles, where the status-obsessed 17-year-old found himself in superficial heaven. Gignac spent much of his early days in LA, milking money out of limo companies, upscale Los Angeles hotels, and Rodeo Drive fashion clothing stores, all while pretending to be Saudi royalty. Ironically, while impersonating a prince, Gignac met a real member of the Saudi royal family. Gignac's claims of what happened during his encounters with actual royalty are just as bizarre as him running into a real Saudi prince. In 2007, Gignac faced charges for defrauding a limo company and using a credit card under the name Omar Khashoggi. Gignac testified in court that his interactions with the Saudi royal family had been the opposite of friendly. Gignac claimed the prince and other male family members performed certain acts with Gignac and subsequently paid him hush money. In other words, Gignac had a logical argument as to why the prince would want to keep him quiet. The incident led to Gignac carrying his royal fantasy to the next level. After his brush with Saudi royalty, Gignac changed his name to Khalid bin Al Saud, who's an actual Saudi Arabian prince. With his delusion growing stronger, Gignac continued masquerading as a Saudi prince, now with the legal name to prove it. He hopped around California, Hawaii, and Florida, committing petty acts of fraud and spending short periods in jail whenever he got caught. Gignac routinely scammed free nights at five-star hotels and followed them up with a few weeks in jail once caught. After spending over 50 days in a Miami jail, Gignac found a new class of victims: wealthy Miami lawyers. Statistics show the average IQ of any attorney in the United States is 108, or 8 points above the world average. However, top-tier attorneys score at around 130, landing them in the gifted category. After scamming stores and hotels, Gignac started targeting attorneys in Miami. He enticed them with opportunities only the Saudi royal family could offer, which is a problem since he's Colombian. He tried to trick Yale graduate Johnny Cochran, who's also otherwise known by pop culture as the head attorney for O.J. Simpson's Dream Team. Gignac requested Cochran and his associates to meet him in jail to discuss his defense. However, Cochran didn't take the bait and decided not to take Prince Gignac's case. But even though skeptical attorneys shook their heads, there were several others who only saw potential. While sitting in a Miami prison, Gignac, now legally Khalid, began calling every attorney in South Florida, claiming he was a Saudi prince seeking representation. After much searching, Khalid's call was finally answered by ambitious Miami attorney Oscar Rodriguez. Oscar saw an opportunity to help Khalid. The bondsman he hired to bail Khalid out of jail later said Rodriguez was mesmerized by the prospect of representing royalty, with the possibility of becoming the lawyer of the Saudi royal family. Rodriguez sent his two bondsmen over to get Khalid out on a $46,000 bond that was supposed to be provided by the prince's father. Of course, the funds never materialized, and Rodriguez told Khalid he would have to return him to jail. Ever resilient, Khalid devised a creative plan that would get him out of the pen. Khalid instructed the bondsman to take him to the American Express office to withdraw money from his family's account. Instead, when the bondsman dropped Khalid off, he rushed in and began crying out to the tellers that he'd been mugged and needed a replacement card. If they did not, he would call his father, the king. The tellers immediately believed him, but had to ask him a security question before allowing Khalid to withdraw from the royal Saudi accounts. But what were the questions? To access the account, Khalid had to know the last two purchases made on the account's transaction list, a list the Colombian prince had never seen. Either Khalid had done his research or got ridiculously lucky because he answered both questions correctly and received a new platinum card containing a $200 million line of credit. After pulling off this stunt, Khalid had convinced the bondsman he was legit and confirmed Rodriguez's hopes of representing royalty. Caught in the throes of euphoria, Khalid took his bondsmen shopping. They rode around town in two limos, buying Rolex watches and other luxurious items. Even though Khalid still had to go back to jail, Rodriguez was hopeful about the future. One day, Rodriguez got a call from American. The express worker informed him that his client, Khalid, was not a Saudi prince and was currently committing fraud. At that same moment, his client was with his wife and daughter about to board a plane with first-class tickets in tow to New York. Rodriguez failed to catch Khalid at the airport, but captured the masquerading prince in his Four Seasons hotel room after hopping on the next flight to New York. Khalid tried to escape, but an enraged Rodriguez threw him on the ground. On their way back to Florida, Gignac almost got Rodriguez arrested at the airport after screaming that he was being kidnapped. Knowing a flight wouldn't pan out well, Rodriguez drove the prince to Miami in the trunk of a rented car. He returned Gignac to jail, recollected their bond, and left with the humiliating experience of being conned by the fake prince. Years later, when Khalid got out of jail, he used social media to keep his con going. Khalid began posting photos of himself wearing Rolexes and riding in fancy cars. Social media exacerbated Khalid's desire to flaunt his status as a prince. Many people genuinely believed Gignac was Khalid, especially now that he could prove his wealth with online pictures. This new level of fake legitimacy opened a new door for Khalid, an entryway into the wallets of the super rich. And the person who opened the door was a British asset manager by the name Carl Martin Williamson. Khalid first teamed with Williamson, a shady character in his own right, around the mid-2010s. Williamson was the kind of guy who seemed to know every famous person. He could even have them on the phone in minutes upon request. So when royalty showed up with a nifty-looking $600 million bank account and a spoiled chihuahua, Williamson couldn't help but involve himself in the prince's scam. He set up an investment company for Gignac called Martin Williamson International, LLC. The thought of investing with the Saudi prince lured investors investors to throw almost $8 million at Williamson International. They believed they were getting a special friends and family pre-offer to a pending IPO for Aramco, a Saudi oil company. That, of course, was a lie. That IPO was valued at $2 trillion. By comparison, Apple's market cap is currently $2 trillion as of this video's publication. Williamson helped produce information that detailed the basics of Martin Williamson, like its logo, which prominently features a fancy crown, symbolizing its royal Saudi ownership. He also showed investors its convenient locations in both New York and Dubai. The information looked perfectly legitimate, and Williamson knew it would attract investors. However, this strategy was more ambitious: offer exclusive equity to wealthy individuals. Khalid gave the thumbs up by writing the official announcement for the IPO's public launch. He wrote about how pleased he was that he, His Royal Highness, was a player in the Saudi Arabian oil tycoon. As icing on the fraud cake, the company's logo bore a royal crown. The crown in Khalid's name carried a prestige that Williamson used to lure in potential investors. Their first taker was an investment banker in London who lent them $150,000. Riding that initial success, Martin International recruited 26 other investors who assumed the Martin Williamson Company was an early capital funnel leading to the glorious Aramco. From those 26 investors, over $7 million was milked. Imagine you're a wealthy investor who wants the honor of being a shareholder of Aramco. Not only would you be involved with one of the most prestigious oil companies in the world, but you'd also be friendly with Saudi royalty. When meeting his victims, Gignac would pull up in a red Ferrari. His short and chubby body was covered in designer clothes and glittering jewelry. A lovely bowl haircut capped off the look. Buff security guards followed him in black suits, and his longtime companion Foxy, the Chihuahua, resided at the bottom of his Louis Vuitton purse. The show of wealth affected potential investors and helped cement the idea that they were indeed in the presence of royalty. They were obliged to pay this wealthy prince in gifts in exchange for his patronage. Khalid's last and wealthiest victim, Jeffrey Soffer, was no exception. Khalid showed up at Soffer's hotel in Florida with the audacious intent of buying an overpriced share of Soffer's business. Soffer, who comes from a long line of savvy businessmen, saw a chance to make a quick $140 million and wanted to begin negotiations right away. However, just like Khalid's other victims, the old money billionaire must pay the prince a worthy tribute. Throughout their negotiations, Soffer gave Khalid $100,000 in art and a $50,000 bracelet. He even invited the prince to his $29 million home in the snow-capped mountains of Aspen. At this point, Gignac is claiming to be next in line for the Saudi throne. Khalid happily accepts, hoping he can continue to milk more money out of Soffer during the visit. Instead, Khalid will make the most costly mistake of his conning career. During an upscale dinner at a popular Aspen restaurant, Prince Khalid ordered a dish that came with prosciutto, a cured meat derived from pork. Soffer immediately knew something was wrong with this so-called Saudi prince. The royal family of Saudi Arabia is famously conservative regarding their adherence to the Quran, forbidding the consumption of pork. Soffer alerted the State Department, which investigated Gignac. After the investigation revealed that Khalid was actually Gignac, the prince was arrested at JFK Airport and charged with an array of fraud crimes. Once the evidence was shown in court, Khalid received an 18-year sentence in 2019 that included an order commanding the trickster to pay $8 million in restitution to his victims.
Carl worked for the United States Air Force and owned his own duck farming business. After growing up on a family farm, Carl also raised and showed horses. Carl's first wife was named Christina. Sadly, she died in a tragic house fire that occurred with the entire family inside. Carl removed his 3 children from the home, but Christina was trapped in the bathroom and did not make it out of the house. Carl and Christina's only son was named Levi, who would go on to have 2 daughters with his now ex-wife Cassie Hahn. After finally getting his life together at 23, Levi had a stable job and a loving family of his own. Unfortunately, in 2008, Levi died while working on his father's truck. The truck fell off the jack and crushed him. Carl also had 2 daughters with Christina named Erin and Katie. He then remarried his second wife, Cindy Best, only 2 years after Christina died in the fire. The words Carlson, life insurance, and tragic death were becoming all too synonymous, and Cindy took notice. The fire that resulted in Christina's death in 1991 started while the entire Carlson family was in the home. Christina, the dedicated mother that she was, yelled for Carl to help save the children while she was trapped in the bathroom. Carl was able to get all 3 children out of the home safely. However, Christina was not so lucky. Officially ruled as an accident, the circumstances around the fire were nothing short of suspicious. The biggest red flag was the life insurance policy Carl took out only 19 days before Christina perished in the fire. If that wasn't enough, the fire started outside the bathroom door, and the bathroom window was boarded up. Carl claimed Christina broke the window a few days earlier, and he boarded it up for obvious reasons. What was odd was the fact that it was boarded up from the inside. All the children vividly remember the day of the fire. Both daughters said that Carl didn't make any effort to rescue his wife from the fire after they were safe. Even before the ambulance arrived, he told his children, "Mommy's gone to heaven." Eventually, investigators determined that Christina died of smoke inhalation while trapped in the bathroom. Carl moved his family from California back to New York, Carl's home state, just 4 days after the fire. The California Department of Forestry investigated the fire, and lead investigator Carl Kent felt that the circumstances seemed suspicious. Additionally, the insurance investigator determined that there seemed to be evidence of the fire being set deliberately. Despite these suspicions, the $200,000 life insurance policy was paid to Carl after Christina's death. Despite being only 4 and 6 years old, both of Carl's daughters had their suspicions about the cause of the fire and their mother's death throughout their lives. The image of him just standing there was effectively burned in their memories. When the children were teenagers, they even went so far as to confront their father about their suspicions. "Levi and I told our father that we knew that he had murdered our mother," Aaron said. The children would talk about how their memories of events did not add up. Still haunted by their father's words, "Mommy's gone to heaven," the children were convinced that Carl was to blame. Despite the suspicious circumstances and the $200,000 life insurance policy taken out just 19 days prior, law enforcement did not pursue the case for foul play. When Carl was interrogated in 2012 about the fire, he stated that the fire was mainly fueled by a kerosene spill in the home's hallway a few weeks prior. That spill just so happened to be on a carpet outside the bathroom where Christina was eventually trapped. Investigations at the time of the fire didn't take note of the kerosene spill coupled with the boarded up window. One of these items alone should have been enough to suspect that the fire was no accident, but it was never reviewed or even called into question. The fire was an accident and would remain an accident for nearly 2 decades. The Carlson family was well known in their hometown community in New York, and Carl kept a close-knit family. Before moving to California, Carl, Christina, and the children spent a lot of time with the extended family. However, when Carl returned with his children after the fire, things had changed. Carl was described as being emotionless, numb, and very stoic. He isolated his family and would not allow his children to visit their cousins as they would have in the past. Friends that were close to Carl and Christina told a different story. They identified Carl as being controlling, causing Christina to become subdued while he was around. Carl even went so far as to answer questions for Christina, including dictating what she would have to drink. All parties close to Carl or the family reported the same changes once Carl returned from California. Levi, Carl's only son, had a rocky relationship with his father. He was known to be goofy, and he loved heavy metal music. The typical misunderstood teen, Levi had a strained relationship with his father, who was military trained and old-fashioned. Levi moved out at the age of 16 and got married 2 years later. He had 2 daughters with his wife Cassie before their divorce after 5 years of marriage. Determined to change his life, Levi got a job at a factory, securing a decent wage and insurance for his children. Unlike Carl, Levi was described by many as a loving father. Once Levi moved home, he attempted to foster a stronger relationship with his own father, even spending more time on the family farm. As their relationship grew, Carl convinced Levi to do more to protect his girls if something happened. This included taking out a $700,000 life insurance policy so that the girls would be taken care of if anything happened to him. Levi agreed, and Carl helped by paying the first life insurance payment for him. Carl was named the policy's sole beneficiary, claiming that Levi's ex-wife couldn't be trusted to do what was right with the money. Carl was to distribute the money to Levi's daughters for whatever they needed upon his death. Just 17 days after finalizing the life insurance, Levi was crushed while working on his dad's truck in the family barn in 2008. The truck had its wheels removed and placed precariously on a jack. Carl then instructed his son to go underneath and do some work on the car. Carl would lead you and authorities to believe fate forced the truck off the jack as its weight crushed Levi. As the sole beneficiary, Carl got the entire $700,000 life insurance policy. For those keeping track, Carl's now $900,000 richer after the tragic deaths of his wife and son. Carl, insurance scam extraordinaire, has collected quite a hefty sum over the years. Not only did he collect $900,000 from his first wife and son's policies, but he's made several other suspicious insurance claims through the years. In 1986, he collected $10,000 due to a car fire. He also collected $115,000 from a barn fire that occurred in 2002. This payout included an insurance policy he took out on one of his horses who had recently become lame and would have to be put down otherwise. Between all these accidents, Carl has collected over $1 million in insurance payouts. Had suspicions not been aroused by Cindy Carlson, wife number 2, Carl could have doubled his bankroll. He took out a $1.2 million insurance policy on Cindy in addition to taking out policies on his granddaughters. So the question remains, why did he do it? The answer may lie in his military career. While in the Army, Carl's job was to transport nuclear weapons for the Air Force. One day, the trailer caught fire, and Carlson was forced to transfer the nuke to a different trailer. According to him, that had never been done before. As far as anyone knew, nothing ever happened. Perhaps Carlson learned how well a fire could hide evidence, especially on heavily insured items like military-grade trailers. Cindy grew suspicious of her husband after Levi's death in 2008. Her suspicions rose after she noticed a $1.2 million policy was taking out on her during a rough patch in their marriage. Cindy became aware of the policy on Levi only after his death. She was surprised, but didn't expect anything serious at the time. However, 2 years later, she began to have her suspicions. Following her gut, Cindy hired a private investigator to have a look into Carl. That was how she found out about the insurance policy taken out on her. Fear shook her to her core. She knew she needed evidence before they could act on her suspicions, so she wore a wire and interrogated Carl about Christina and Levi's deaths. Carl admitted to Cindy that he took advantage of the situation after the truck fell on Levi and didn't stop to help him. However, he denied the accident itself was his fault. Despite this denial, authorities had what they needed to begin an investigation. Carl Carlson pled guilty to second-degree murder. However, because of his plea agreement, the insurance fraud charges were dropped. Carl did not admit to causing the accident that killed Levi. However, when his daughters confronted him about their mother once again, he said, quote, "It's been over 20 years and they still haven't gotten me yet. What makes you think they're going to get me now?" While everyone believes he bumped the truck off the jack, Carl maintains that it fell by accident and that his only crime was not attempting to save his son. Carl was sentenced to 15 years to life for second-degree murder. He would have been eligible for parole in 2027. However, during a new investigation into the death of Christina, Carlson was finally charged with her murder. This earned him a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Those who remain are the long-term victims of such cruelty. Even though Carl faces a life sentence, the surviving children and family are still experiencing the pain of their loss. Carl's daughters took solace in having a definitive answer. Although they knew in their hearts that Carl was involved in their mother's death, then rest assured knowing the rest of the world agrees with them. Unfortunately, they live with some guilt over their brother's death. They wonder if maybe they'd said something sooner, if he'd still be alive today. While nothing can change the past, Erin looks ahead to the future. When asked about the outcome she hopes for, she said, "I want him to look me in the eye and tell me exactly what he did. Then I want him to go away for the rest of forever." Anna de Rothschild boasted about her family lineage while wearing expensive designer clothes, a Rolex watch, and driving her $170,000 Mercedes. Being a part of the Rothschild family sure does have its perks, being the most famous European banking family for the last 200 years. A year before the FBI raid of Mar-a-Lago was when Anna went golfing with the A-listers. That evening, she joined them for dinner at an Italian restaurant, where she continuously talked about her life as a daughter of the Rothschild family. John Lefebvre, another attendee, noticed how everyone was eating it up. Those who knew her, including Paul Barton, a very wealthy property developer, claim she talked about opening a high-class hotel in Monaco, a Formula One racetrack in Miami, and developing a luxury housing project in Emerald Bay. Barton claimed that everyone thought that her grandfather was the one who had the money. He stated that his company paid for her to fly out to a resort project in the Bahamas 3 times. They offered to sell their residential development for $55 million, but they made no such sale. You can probably imagine her delight at being invited to Mar-a-Lago for a golf outing with Donald Trump, Lindsey Graham, and other political luminaries. There, she talked about her family's vineyards and estates and how it was growing up in Monaco. According to Anna, a confident 33-year-old woman, she was allowed inside without question where she could meet with potential investors for her company. She was never related to the Rothschild family. Her name is Inna Yashishin, and she wholly fabricated her Anna identity. Inna Yashishin was an immigrant from Ukraine. Her parents were truck drivers who moved to the United States at least a decade ago. While her parents live in Chicago, Inna has spent time in Montreal, Canada, as well as Miami, Florida, about an hour away from Mar-a-Lago. She also got married to a man named Sergei Golubev. When the FBI questioned him, he stated that their marriage was only on paper to help her get her United States residency. He claimed that she needed something more permanent. He hadn't been in contact with her since their divorce in 2016. In 2010, Miss Yashishin founded a charity in Canada called United Hearts of Mercy. In 2015, she founded another one in Miami. United Hearts of Mercy claimed that their goal was to help liberate children from spiritual, social, economic, and physical poverty in places such as Africa, the Dominican Republic, Haiti, the United States, and Canada. Yashishin also admitted to working as an independent consultant for a company called Ambit Energy, a firm that was fined in 2019 for defrauding customers. She also worked for a company called Miami Mama. This South Florida company was very controversial for helping expectant Russian mothers give birth in the United States in order to gain citizenship. During this time was when she met Valery Tarasenko. In 2014, Valery Tarasenko, a 44-year-old Russian businessman, met Inna Yashishin, and the two forged a very close relationship. Recently, their relationship has turned for the worst, as they entered into a legal battle against each other. With this, their stories about their relationship change depending on who's telling them. According to Tarasenko, he hired Yashishin to be the nanny to his 2 daughters while he was out. She claimed that she was never his nanny. Instead, they were in a supposed romantic relationship where he coerced her to steal money from men on the street, in restaurants, or even at events. They supposedly used the money to fund their lifestyle together. Yashishin claimed that she would form a relationship with men. Then Tarasenko would take her phone and send messages asking for money to help pay for phone bills, food, etc. Although Tarasenko would deny everything, including their relationship, the FBI found romantic apology texts sent from Tarasenko to Yashishin. The Post-Gazette and the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project, or OCCRP for short, would interview 2 men who admitted to giving money to Yashishin and being scammed by her for thousands of dollars. We have no way to prove which one of them was behind the phone, scamming men. However, we know that Tarasenko and Yashishin worked together to open both United Hearts of Mercy locations. To avoid publicly announcing how much revenue the charity made, they claim that the charity made less than $50,000. However, according to their own internal documents, United Hearts of Mercy actually made over $200,000 in 2020 to help with COVID relief. However, it was soon cut off by payment processors due to suspicion of fraud. In 2021, Tatiana Verselina, the charity's certified accountant, made a sworn statement to the FBI claiming that she had helped set up the Stripe Inc. account for the charity. She stated that the charity was a source of illicit funds for organized crime. Stripe Inc. determined that the money flowing into the charity was coming from credit cards and bank accounts not authorized by owners in Hong Kong. When trying to reach out to them, every single email had bounced back, meaning they were all fake emails intended to confuse the payment processing system. Fundraiser.com confirmed to OCCRP that they shut down one of the charity funding drives run under Verselina's name in 2020. It failed internal fraud checks even before it could deposit money. Verselina stated that shortly after making the account, she started receiving threatening phone calls from unknown numbers, claiming that if she didn't return the money, she and her family would be harmed and killed. Her family, living in Russia, received many of the same type of phone phone calls as well. So, what's going on here? Well, Tarasenko had 2 daughters. His older daughter, 18-year-old Sofia, wanted to become a musician, so, according to Yashishin, Tarasenko changed her last name to Rothschild in order for her to have a better shot at making it big in America. On Sofia's Instagram, it shows her going by the name Sophia Rothschild, and you can see that she's trying to become a well-known musician. Sophia plays multiple instruments, dances, and sings. There's no evidence that she was involved in any misconduct. Yashishin claims that it was Tarasenko's idea to create limited liability companies. He had her change the name of the Canadian location to Rothschild's Media Company, Inc. She also states that it was Sophia who publicly started calling her Aunt Anna de Rothschild. As for the Mar-a-Lago incident, she claims she was invited by one of Sophia's friends, Elkanan Elke Adamker, the founder of a New York financial services company. She says nobody asked for identification, so she never provided it. They invited her to dinner with the others, including former Missouri Governor Eric Greitens. He had invited her to a fundraiser he would be hosting and signed 4 books for her. It wasn't until March 2022 that anyone knew that there had been a breach of safety for the former president. Dean Lawrence, a Florida music promoter and exotic car leasing agent, attended an evening dinner with Trump insiders at Mar-a-Lago. The dinner included people such as rappers Kodak Black and Ray J, along with Donald Trump and former New York Police Commissioner Bernard Kerik. He warned attendees that Anna de Rothschild was a fraud. He had informed them that he recognized Anna from her company Rothschild Media label, where they were currently promoting Tarasenko's daughter, who used Rothschilds as a stage name. When he told Kofod, a Trump campaign donor, and Caroline Wren, a former national advisor of the Trump campaign, he claimed that Kofod's eye had grown wide as he explained that Inna Yashishin had been to his house. Lawrence was distraught by the idea that he was the one divulging the news of a potential breach to Trump insiders rather than the ones who are supposed to be protecting the Trump family. He was the one trying to understand how they allowed this to happen. He, along with many people, asked the same question as to how someone with a fake identity could so easily stand next to critical political figures multiple times without being caught. This raises questions about why security did no background check on her. Was it a political intelligence breach, or was it a financial fraud case? Due to the contradicting stories, her motives are unknown. 2 years prior, 2 different Chinese women were arrested on 2 separate occasions after entering Mar-a-Lago with thumb drives containing malicious software. The openness of Mar-a-Lago and the ability to walk in without a background check were finally being realized. This instance was what triggered the FBI to look into Anna, or as we know her, Inna. Tarasenko filed an affidavit in Miami-Dade County Court claiming that Yashishin was part of an international criminal organization. He said that she went through many different identities for wealthy dynasties, including Anna Kruger, a family who made their fortune in paper, and Inessa Cavalli, an Italian family. They owned a fashion company worth more than $500 million. He also claimed that Yashishin worked for the most brutal oligarchs in Russia, including working for Putin indirectly. When the FBI questioned Yashishin, she stated that she was invited to Mar-a-Lago and was there looking for investors for Rothschild's Media Company, Inc. She claimed that Tarasenko continues to use her to get money from investors and that he keeps track of her every move. According to her, she never told people that she was Anna de Rothschild, and it was Tarasenko who fabricated the entire story. Yashishin also stated that this isn't the first time that Tarasenko has filed a lawsuit against her. Every time she leaves him, he does it. The first time was when he claimed that she had gone after his daughter. Yashishin went ahead and filed a restraining order against him. According to her attorney, Tarasenko has violated the restraining order multiple times. Yashishin thinks it's ridiculous that Tarasenko would claim that she's a Russian spy. To her, Russian people basically are her enemy since they invaded her country and went after her family. As for the multiple fake IDs and passport that show her name being Anna Rothschild, she claims that Tarasenko created them all. She said she had nothing to do with them. According to her, all she wanted was to be free from him. Yashishin claimed that every single move she made was directed by Tarasenko. She even claims to have resigned from both businesses to help get out of his control because after the first few times she realized that he was just using her. Yashishin claimed that her friends and supporters encouraged her to get out of her toxic relationship, so she did. Little did they know that she was wrapped up in a huge scam that the FBI would soon follow her every move. So let's review. According to Tarasenko, Yashishin has multiple identities and works as a Russian spy. According to Yashishin, Tarasenko is the ex who filed fake lawsuits against her and forced her to do his bidding. We don't know who the criminal mastermind is with all the evidence presented. It's clear that both parties are allegedly involved in a fraud case with their limited liability companies, but does the story go deeper than that? Who do you think is telling the truth? Is Tarasenko right about Yashishin being a Russian employee? Why would he continue violating a restraining order against him? And what about all the times that he's been caught lying in the past? There's no way to prove that it was Tarasenko sending messages to the men with whom she would form relationships. Only time and more investigation will help uncover the mystery behind this case. What's a worse scam? Making a COVID pesticide and making people feel secure, like what Paul Andricola did, or faking cancer with your significant other like Rebecca Gray? Let's get right into it. Number 3, fake cancer. It started as a normal love story. Boy meets girl, boy falls in love with girl, boy notices the girl's mom calls all the time, girl's mom turns out to be her second boyfriend. In the beginning, Sean Fry thought nothing of all the phone calls his then girlfriend Rebecca Gray got from her mother. But as their relationship grew, Rebecca Gray's lies grew too. Ultimately, her web of deceit was too complicated for her to keep secret. The couple met on Tinder, and after a few dates, Rebecca Gray revealed that she had terminal cancer. Even though this was devastating news for Sean, he really liked Rebecca and they continued to date. As their relationship blossomed, Fry began supporting Gray through her cancer treatments, or so he thought. Gray made up elaborate stories about her symptoms, her organs failing, and even a blood transfusion. As Fry notes, he never thought twice as to whether Gray had cancer or not. She told him she had cancer, so why wouldn't he believe her? He could never imagine anybody would lie to him about something so grave. It turns out, Rebecca Gray didn't have cancer. To add insult to injury, when Fry thought Gray was in the hospital, she was actually dating 2 other men. This was one busy single mom. By December of 2016, Sean Fry was in love with Rebecca Gray. The couple traveled to meet Sean's parents for the holidays when Gray took her fraud to the next level and announced she was pregnant with Fry's child. For about a month, the happy couple planned for their baby's arrival. By this point, Sean Fry was fully committed. He was in love, he was about to be a father, and he was funding Gray's cancer treatments. Except Gray didn't have cancer, and she was not pregnant. In late January, after a month of baby planning, Gray told Fry she had lost the child. Sean was devastated, and so were his parents. The emotional manipulation was spiraling out of control, and soon, Gray's lies would spiral too. It turns out lying about cancer, a pregnancy, and a miscarriage weren't enough. Gray decided to layer her lies with multiple boyfriends. Unfortunately for Gray, her heartless ambition would be her downfall. To conceal her boyfriends from one another, Gray used fake names in her phone. Notably, one of Gray's unidentified victims was labeled Mum's Phone. He uncovered this secret while helping Gray find her phone one evening. When he saw that he was saved in Gray's phone as her mother, he suspected the worst and checked her messages. Her secret was out. He had uncovered Gray's tangled web of lies. This boyfriend found Sean Fry on Facebook, and they put everything together. Looking back, Fry remembers Gray's mom calling a lot. He now knows it was actually one of her many boyfriends. Love can be so blinding. Fry thought it was impossible for Gray to have any time for another man with all her hospital visits, and that's when the light bulb went off. Rebecca Gray wasn't sick. She didn't have cancer. She wasn't spending lots of time at the hospital. She was with her other lovers. It turns out, when Gray announced her fake miscarriage, she was actually away on a camping trip with another man. Man, that's so cruel. The 2 boyfriends got in touch with Gray's father, who confirmed she'd been lying about her terminal cancer for many years to multiple family members. It seems as though she had been crafting the perfect lie and using it on as many people as she could. Can it get any crazier? Yes, it can! After Sean and the unidentified boyfriend broke up with Rebecca Gray, she upped the ante. Neither Sean nor Gray's other boyfriend tried to get their money back, but Gray was unable to move on from her lies. She called the police and told them that Sean Fry was stalking her. The cops showed up at Sean's home, and when the police arrived, Sean revealed the entire fraud. He shared all of his messages as evidence, and the police immediately knew who was at fault. They eventually charged Rebecca Gray with fraud. Gray finally admitted to her web of lies in court and pleaded guilty to 3 fraud charges, including defrauding her boyfriends out of $11,000. Her relationship with Sean Fry lasted 18 months. 18 months of lies and scamming. Sean had to take an $8,000 loan out from his parents after giving thousands to Gray. Of course, the emotional toll is impossible to quantify. Rebecca Gray will be sentenced later this year. Number 2. Embezzling life. Elizabeth Mulder is a scammer from Orange County, California. She defrauded multiple businesswomen out of more than $1.5 million and spent their money on extravagant luxuries like horse rentals, valuable jewelry, plastic surgery, expensive vacations, and a rental home in Laguna Beach. Mulder used her lies to live an indulgent life in Southern California, and she did it by preying on women who owned their own businesses. Elizabeth Mulder set up a business called Mulder Financial Services. While posing as an accountant who graduated from Pepperdine University, it appears Mulder had only taken a few courses at a community college and was not a CPA. Mulder targeted women with small businesses and young children just like herself. She networked, invited entrepreneurial women to parties, and snuck her way into the lives of these business women. After connecting with her prey, Mulder ingratiated herself as a friend, a mother, and a business partner who would handle her victims' accounting and tax services. In some cases, Mulder convinced her clients to write checks to various entities that would settle debts and cover tax expenses. In reality, Mulder was pocketing these funds and using her victims' money on luxury goods. Mulder spread her fraud all across the OC, from San Juan Capistrano to Laguna Beach, San Clemente, Costa Mesa, Newport Beach, and Irvine. There's a lot of money that lines the streets of these SoCal beach towns, and Elizabeth Mulder knew exactly where to strike. Mulder convinced her clients to make their income tax checks payable to a company called IRS Tax Services. Of course, none of those payments made their way to the U.S. government. Instead, they went to fund the lifestyle of a conniving fraudster, out to target ladies trying to build their businesses. As a result of this fraud, many of the victims will be struggling for years to come. Joanne Kurtz Allers is one of Mulder's victims. Mulder offered to help Kurtz Allers take out an insurance policy for her luxury travel agency, but sent the money for the policy directly to one of her fake businesses. Joanne Kurtz Allers wrote 44 checks to Mulder between 2011 and 2016. Another victim, Lauren Scaccia, co-owner of the Tony and Guy hair salon in Newport Beach, lost $291,000 to Mulder. Scaccia attended Dana Hills High School with Mulder and ran into her at a wedding in Italy. After claiming to be a CPA, Mulder began stealing from Scaccia and ultimately forged 77 checks to defraud her old classmate. Scaccia is still trying to climb out of debt and doesn't see an end in sight. Lauren Almeida is a Pilates instructor who opened a studio in San Clemente, California. After meeting Mulder in an exercise class, Almeida and Mulder became fast friends. They took family vacations together and were extremely close. At one point, Lauren Almeida explains that she looked at Mulder as a sister. But after gaining Lauren Almeida's trust, Mulder ultimately stole $202,000 from Almeida using false identities. In the end, it was Mulder's own husband who outed her to clients and the authorities. After he discovered the fraud, he personally contacted the defrauded clients and the authorities. The FBI, IRS, and Laguna Beach Police Department teamed up to investigate Mulder and eventually bring charges against her. She pled guilty to wire fraud and defrauding the IRS of the misappropriated funds. Mulder was sentenced to 63 months in a federal prison and must pay $1,538,781 back to her victims at the IRS. It seems that she got off pretty easy, knowing that the maximum fine could have placed her behind bars for 23 years. It seems as though Mulder was defrauding her victims as far back as 2009. But only Mulder will really know the extent of her fraud, turned in by her own husband. That has gotta hurt. Maybe as much as the $1.5 million that she stole from innocent moms, friends, and entrepreneurs. Number 1. COVID pesticides. Paul Andricola is a chemist from New Jersey. He sold $2.7 million in fake COVID-fighting pesticides to government organizations throughout the COVID-19 pandemic. The United States Marshal Service fell for Andricola's false claims that his product had been approved by the EPA to kill COVID-19. Along with the U.S. Marshals, Andricola also managed to sell his fake COVID pesticides to Moody Air Force Base, the National Forest Service, a New York-based janitorial supply company, a Virginia Fire Department, a Georgia medical clinic, a Wisconsin school district, a Delaware police department, and the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs. Paul Andricola named his product G-Clean and sold his fraudulent materials from March 2020 until May 2021. As of June 2022, Androcola's case was the largest pandemic fraud conviction for illegal pesticides in the country. As a chemist, Paul Androcola was in a unique position to take advantage of various organizations and customers who looked to him as an expert in the field of disinfectant manufacturing. At the time, Paul Androcola was a research director for one manufacturing company and a co-founder of another manufacturing company. Androcola used another company's information to falsify documents that erroneously claimed this product, G-Clean, disinfected COVID-19. But it didn't. He used those fake documents to mislead his customers and convince them that the Environmental Protection Agency approved his product for public use. The U.S. Attorney's Office obtained emails from Mr. Androcola lying directly to his customers about the efficacy of his product. Paul Androcola was in a very unique position to manipulate the fear and concern spreading through the nation during the pandemic. He capitalized on the nation's fear to obtain millions of dollars and potentially endangered his customers who believed they were buying a protection that would disinfect against and kill COVID-19. Paul Androcola made around 150 sales to customers, one of which was worth over $1 million. Mr. Androcola pleaded guilty to numerous charges resulting from his fraudulent activity, including the illegal sale of an unregistered pesticide, wire fraud, and false claims against the United States government. These charges carry a range of maximum jail sentences between 1 and 20 years. Androcola will also pay $2.7 million in restitution for all the funds he swindled. Seems like the crime wasn't worth the time. The U.S. government is still currently pursuing COVID-19 scammers nationwide. COVID scammers were able to profit by stealing pandemic relief funds, selling fake vaccine cards, and manufacturing falsified test results, just to name a few. President Biden and the Justice Department named Kevin Chambers to lead the charge against COVID fraudsters. It is believed that scammers have stolen or attempted to steal up to $8 billion worth of government pandemic resources. That's a lot of COVID cheddar. While Androcola stands to serve many years in prison for his crimes, this scammer will be sentenced on October 11, 2022.
Giovanni Di Stefano might just be one of the most confusing criminals in modern history. He's been charged with over 20 fraud-related felonies. He's also represented some of the worst people on earth, such as Saddam Hussein, all while simultaneously scamming them. Giovanni was born in 1955 in Petrella Tifernina, a town in southern Italy. When Giovanni turned 6, his father moved their family to Northamptonshire, England, where he got a job at a shoe factory. As an immigrant, Giovanni felt he needed to prove he wasn't just a strange foreigner. He did so by making several outlandish claims. When he filled out a local marquee Who's Who mini bio, Giovanni wrote that he had recently obtained a PhD in law from Cambridge University. He was a teenager at the time. When Giovanni reached his 20s, his claims got larger and more elaborate. For example, he once claimed that he owned a $200 million videotape business. No, he didn't invent Blockbuster. Giovanni took his claims further and made decisions as if he were actually wealthy. In 1976, when Giovanni was 21, he was sentenced to 3 years in prison for agreeing to buy a property with money he didn't have. The sentence also included other fraudulent charges. But to this day, Giovanni claims he wasn't the man who committed the crimes. Instead, he insists that another man with his name, birthday, and birthplace defrauded the property sellers. Apparently, the evil twin brother excuse didn't work. He tried appealing the charges until 1984, when Giovanni was arrested again for fraud. 2 years later, British courts charged him for trying to trick someone into selling him their property. The trial lasted 78 days and resulted in Giovanni spending 3 years in jail. All in all, Giovanni spent 3.5 years behind bars, and that's not counting the time he spent under arrest for the dozens of fraudulent crimes he committed, including obtaining property by deception and fraudulent trading. After an early release in '89, Giovanni needed a fresh start, where no one knew his name. Perhaps someplace he could practice law. So that year, he moved to America, where he tried to pull his biggest scam yet. Giovanni had big, flashy dreams, so he went where dreams come true, Los Angeles. He bounced around different parts of the city before finding an opportunity he just couldn't pass up, buying MGM movie studios. There were several bids on the studio currently active, and all of them were in the 8-figure range. Despite having almost no money to his name, Giovanni forged a bid that caught the eye of studio heads. They accepted Giovanni's proposal Universal. But when the studio tried contacting this mysteriously generous buyer, he was nowhere to be found. Eventually, local authorities tracked Giovanni down and deported him back to England. The only problem was Giovanni still had legal issues there, so he fled to the safest yet most dangerous nation in Europe, Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia was in the process of literally breaking apart. Revolutions and defections were springing up all around the nation, causing the map to redraw itself several times from 1989 to 1992. Giovanni arrived in Yugoslavia in 1992, but the country was still dangerous. Its infrastructure was partially compromised, meaning investigators wouldn't risk placing officers in harm's way just to catch a fraudster. The move was smart on Giovanni's part, but he still felt like a failure. So the down-on-his-luck fraudster began seeking out opportunities in war-torn Yugoslavia. It took Giovanni 5 years to find the opportunity he was looking for. In 1997, Giovanni used his slightly misplaced confidence to charm Slobodan Milosevic, the then president of Yugoslavia. It's unclear what Giovanni told President Slobodan. Still, it was enough to earn the former American immigrant a high place in the leader's political circle. Giovanni used his access to Slobodan to expand his social circles, eventually leading him to warlord Arkan, one of the most infamous individuals in Serbian history. Arkan was indeed a warlord. He was also a mobster, bank robber, and responsible for leading a genocidal campaign in Croatia. He hired Giovanni to numerous positions in his organization. First, the Serbian warlord provided Giovanni with Yugoslavian citizenship. Then he appointed Giovanni as his official spokesman and business partner. But it was the third position that meant the most to Giovanni, the position of personal legal representative. Remember, Giovanni never spent a single day in law school. From around 1997 to 1999, Giovanni represented Arkan. He defended him publicly on many occasions and even helped his army, the Arkan Tigers, though he never actually saw any combat. In 1999, things in Yugoslavia were not looking good. Among dozens of other crimes, Slobodan was being investigated for genocide, and Arkan was stepping down from his warlord position. So Giovanni decided to leave Eastern Europe and head south to Italy, his homeland. He eventually settled in Rome, where he opened up a law office. Giovanni's primary clientele, however, came from the UK. Charles Bronson was one of Giovanni's most notorious English clients. Many criminal justice experts believe Bronson was, and still is, the most violent prisoner in British history. Giovanni also represented another violent criminal named Patrick Holland. In 2006, Giovanni helped Patrick flee to his office in Rome. He subsequently arranged press conferences and interviews so his client could proclaim his innocence. He was accused of taking a journalist's life. Giovanni continued representing the worst criminals he could find. In 2004, he offered his services to serial killer Harold Shipman, who some believe killed over 250 people. Shipman, however, declined Giovanni's offer. Nevertheless, Giovanni still went on TV and conducted interviews as Shipman's attorney. As you can see, Giovanni loved going on TV and giving interviews. He hit the jackpot of TV fame when he landed the biggest client of all, Saddam Hussein. Iraqi dictator Saddam Hussein was constantly in the news in the early 2000s. His capture caught the attention of millions of viewers worldwide, who all expected to see Saddam put to death for his numerous crimes. Giovanni was one of those viewers, but unlike almost everyone else watching these remarkable events unfold, he felt Saddam needed someone to represent him. So, not long after hearing the news, Giovanni contacted Saddam Hussein and signed on to his legal team in 2004. Giovanni helped organize his defense, but did not stick around for Saddam's trial. Saddam was later found guilty of crimes against humanity, and the rest is history. The world rejoiced at Saddam's passing. Many historians consider him to be one of the most vile political leaders of the late 20th century. He hurt his own people on numerous occasions and attempted to wipe out the Kurdish people living in Iraq. But none of those well-documented crimes kept Giovanni from proudly telling people Saddam Hussein was a close friend, and how Giovanni thinks Saddam was a nice guy. The Guardian says he's the only person alive to willingly make those claims. They're probably right. Giovanni also represented another Iraqi war criminal, Saddam's cousin, Chemical Ali. Ali's real name is Ali Hassan al-Mahdi. He served as a defense minister under his cousin's regime. He was also in charge of Kuwait during the Gulf Wars, amongst many other jobs and titles. In other words, he was important. Ali earned his nickname after infamously ordering chemical weapon strikes on Kurdish villages, filled with innocent civilians. He admitted in a secret recording that he personally ordered the attack. Giovanni joined his legal team in 2006. This time, however, Giovanni went with his client to trial. Ali pleaded guilty, somewhat reluctantly, to ordering the attacks. In 2010, the court found Ali guilty and sentenced him to the same fate as his cousin, Saddam. Giovanni built his business on representing the worst people on earth. That was his brand, and many people in the UK hired Giovanni based on that reputation. Not every client was a serial killer, gangster, or dictator. Still, most of Giovanni's clientele came to him with heinous criminal charges, like Paul Bush, who was convicted of kidnapping, among other horrible things, in 2003. He hired Giovanni to represent him after his initial arrest. Giovanni's first job was to bail Bush out of jail. Bush's wife paid Giovanni $26,000 in legal fees and an additional $132,000 to secure her husband's bail. However, their appeal to bail out Bush was denied. Typically, an attorney would return the bail money to their client after a judge's denial, but Giovanni wasn't an actual attorney. Giovanni only returned a small fraction of the bail money back to Bush's wife. A similar thing happened to drug smuggler Laurent Pencheff's parents. They hired Giovanni in 2005 when their son got charged with participating in an international drug smuggling ring. Giovanni charged the distressed couple $13,000 in legal fees. He would, in return, offer Pencheff legal advice. The Pencheffs would later testify against Giovanni, revealing that he never gave their son clear or helpful advice. He didn't do an ounce of litigation during Pencheff's trial, meaning Giovanni never argued for his client in the courtroom. Eventually, people other than the Pencheffs took notice of Giovanni's suspicious behavior. One investigator watched him in court and noticed that Giovanni never spoke on behalf of his clients. In fact, he wasn't doing anything at all. In 2006, a British judge ordered Giovanni to verify his legal qualifications before the trial. Giovanni, of course, failed to provide the necessary information, and the trial commenced without him. No one noticed how odd that was until 7 years later, when British investigators discovered that Giovanni didn't have, nor ever had, a license to practice law in the UK. A group of Spanish police arrested Giovanni on Valentine's Day 2011 in Palma, Spain. From there, the Spanish police sent Giovanni back to the UK, where he faced up to 75 years in prison. The UK prosecutors charged Giovanni with over 18 counts of fraud. In 2013, they convicted Giovanni on almost every count. He was sentenced to 14 years in prison after pleading guilty to 2 additional scams he pulled outside of his law firm. But there was one charge Giovanni refused to admit guilty to: illegally advocating for people in court. An advocate is different from an attorney. An advocate can be anyone with an educational background in law, whereas an attorney is someone who has passed their designated bar exam. Giovanni argued that he was a qualified advocate based on a whimsical technicality. While Giovanni lived in Yugoslavia, he asked President Slobodan to award him an honorary law doctorate from Belgrade University. Slobodan granted his request, technically making Giovanni a qualified advocate. But because he advertised himself as a lawyer, the honorary doctorate didn't cover the entire charge of impersonating a legal professional, advocate, or attorney. His argument raises a question, though. Did Giovanni really believe he was a legal expert? Giovanni wrote an autobiography called Defending the Indefensible. He writes, of course, on his life, but focuses attention on his life philosophy, defending the people whose actions cannot possibly be justified. Outside of his book, Giovanni's made comments about defending Hitler and the devil. He's proposed a vague hypothetical defense case for Hitler, and in a public statement, Giovanni asked why Satan shouldn't have a chance as well. He believes Hitler would have been found innocent had he been tried under some legal loophole. As for the devil, well, we're sure that'd be an exciting reality TV show. Is it all a ploy to lure in scam victims, or does Giovanni actually believe his life philosophy? One thing is for sure, regardless of whether or not Giovanni believed what he said, he definitely lived it. For 3 years, Katie Mancuso ran the sports management agency called Gray Area Management. As the name of the company ironically suggests, she didn't run it by the book. The entire thing was scheme. A Ponzi scheme. A Ponzi scheme worth over $2 million. Leaning on her looks and her ability to tell lies without a care, Katie conned investors who believed she was representing star athletes from every major sport. The only thing she ever really represented was greed. According to the company's website, Gray Area Management was a marketing firm specializing in brand recognition, strategy development, and market research. Gray Area presented itself as a sports management company, providing professional athletes with endorsements and sponsorships. According to its website, Gray Area boasts clients spanning different sports disciplines, including the NFL, Major League Baseball, and the money-laden NBA. Riding on 11 years of experience, Gray Area, led by Katie, offered to create value, solutions, and results for their clients. The company claimed to have partnerships with big brands such as Nike, Red Bull, Pepsi, Gillette, and Oakley. To an up-and-coming athlete, this sounds like a deal made in heaven. In a letter written by Katie and posted on the company's website, her message is somewhat vague but enticing. She claims that Gray Area was different from other management companies because they didn't have an extensive roster. True to her word, she reported having 38 clients but never revealed any of their names. After all, it is not a breach of privacy. Many athletes are open about their management partners and vice versa. Flaunting their star-studded client list is how actual sports management firms attract up-and-coming players. Coincidentally, a gray area is defined as an area of activity not readily conforming to a category or set of rules. Did Katie know from day one that she'd be weaving a web of lies? How did the name of her company not raise eyebrows from the beginning? Would you hand your money over to a company that operates in the gray area? $2.8 million. According to the U.S. Attorney's Office in Nashville, that's the hefty amount Katie pocketed from unsuspecting investors. Katie lured investors into the gray area by boasting her laundry list of famous clients, but could never back up her claims with any real names. She must have seen herself as some sort of investing magician. She always refused to reveal her tricks. Her biggest trick of all, convincing investors that her company had been awarded marketing contracts for professional athletes across every major sport in America. Katie often overstated Gray Area's assets and promised to repay the investors within 90 days. Additionally, she spiced up the deal by promising attractive interest rates, usually between 15 to 25%. The conniving entrepreneur provided investors with fake invoices that falsely reflected funds owed to her company. According to Katie, brands like Nike, Oakley, and Under Armour owed her millions. How did she keep it going? Well, at the peak of her con career, Katie consistently generated fraudulent documents and data, including invoices and emails, all to make her business appear legitimate. Katie was a master forger, scribbling fake attorney signatures on documents and trying to pass them as confidential attorney-client privilege information. But she didn't stop at lawyers. If there was a signature that needed forging, Katie was there to write it. Between June 2017 and February 2021, Katie illegally solicited funds from at least 26 investors and laughed all the way to the bank with over $2.8 million. Being a Ponzi scheme, which is paying earlier investors with funds from new investors, Katie did repay a few of her earlier victims. Paying earlier investors the money you promised them is how most Ponzi schemes get off the ground. Still, the total loss to later investors stood at about $1.1 million. What's the downfall of every Ponzi scheme? The money well dries up. With free-flowing cash, the boss babe was living life in the fast lane. The 40-year-old Nashville-born and bred Katie knew how to spend money better than anybody. She splurged a good chunk of the money on plastic surgery, expensive drinks, over-the-top hotel reservations, and cars, among other things. Her appetite for the finer things in life was fed by the need to defraud more investors. If Katie Mancuso is found guilty and convicted, she'll be looking at up to 20 years for wire fraud and up to 30 years for bank fraud. But until proven guilty in the court of law, Katie remains innocent. Katie's case just hit the headlines, but the SEC is determined to unravel the truth and unmask her for who she is and her wrongdoing. After all, they wouldn't bring charges against her if they didn't have concrete evidence. However, Katie is not the first person to benefit from posing as a sports management agency. Sports management fraud is a breeding ground for people who want quick money without working hard. One of the most famous sports management scammers is Peggy King. and her deception of Dennis Rodman. The NBA Hall of Famer was robbed by Peggy King years after she won him over as a trusting client. Peggy built a sports management empire with the creme de la creme of sports stars on her roster. Her client list included Rodman, among other NBA stars and NFL icons like Ricky Williams and Lex Hilliard. Rodman trusted Peggy so much that he handed over control of his bank account. In hindsight, handing over the keys to his account was one of the worst decisions Rodman ever made. Rodman had the power cut to his Florida condo after not paying his electricity bills. Then, he found a court order in the mail after failing to pay his child support. Peggy blamed Rodman's financial woes on his spending habits. However, as his financial manager, Peggy was in charge of paying these bills with Rodman's money. Instead, she spent it on herself. The most questionable purchase on Rodman's bank statement? A Victoria's Secret shopping spree. Peggy's run-in with Dennis Rodman is only scraping the surface of her devious schemes. However, her scam went unnoticed for so long that she almost got a reality show on BET. You can watch the full video on the Peggy King story here. In yet another sports management incident, Nevin Shapiro graced the headlines for all the wrong reasons, thanks to his orchestration of a multi-million-dollar Ponzi scheme. Shapiro raked in $930 million through his scheme, targeting University of Miami athletes, bigwig investors, and professional athletes. He enticed young players to attend the University of Miami with cash and favors, an act known as boosting that coincidentally exists in the gray area of NCAA regulations. He even purchased a state-of-the-art yacht to host his lavish parties. At the peak of his illicit business, Shapiro dined with Shaquille O'Neal, Dwayne Wade, and Kevin Garnett. Through his firm, Capital Investments, Shapiro claimed he traded wholesale groceries. He attracted several investors, promising to pay them 10 to 26% commissions every month. However, it was all a sham. Now, millions of dollars in debt and facing an extensive prison sentence, Shapiro's scam was over. You can catch his full story in this video here.
Jonathan Walton may not be super famous, but the shows he has helped produce are household names. Reality shows such as Shark Tank and American Ninja Warrior rank at the top of his resume. Besides being a reality TV show producer, Jonathan's personal life was relatively uneventful till a strange woman entered the picture and turned his quiet existence into a blockbuster crime film. Jonathan first met our mystery woman in his high-rise apartment building in downtown Los Angeles. He was trying to organize a few like-minded neighbors to protest the closing of the building pool, and the most passionate person he could find was an Irish woman named Mayor Smith. Together with other neighbors who wanted their pool back, Jonathan and Mayor took charge of the dispute with the owners. According to Jonathan, Mayor proved to be the most passionate, protesting the issue harder than anyone else. After the pool dispute, Jonathan and Mayor hit it off and began developing a friendship. Jonathan says Mayor wanted to get to know him and his husband, so the gregarious Mayor offered to take Jonathan and his husband out to a nice dinner. However, Jonathan didn't realize exactly how nice. The bill arrived totaling $600. Jonathan recalls how nonchalant Mayor was about the expensive bill. From then on, Jonathan knew Mayor had money, he just didn't know where it came from. As Jonathan got to know Mayor better, she gradually told him her bizarre, almost too good to be true life story and continued to shower him with gifts and fancy dinner. Mayor wanted Jonathan to know she had money. Anytime they were out and something pricey needed to be paid for, Mayor would whip out her card. Eventually, Mayor revealed the source of her wealth. While her story might seem absurd to the average person, hearing the tale straight from a friend is much different. In Jonathan's own words, who would lie about something so specific? Mayor told Jonathan in convincing detail that she is originally from Ireland, where her family is a political royalty. In her apartment, Mayor showed Jonathan her framed copy of the Irish Constitution. Among the signees is her great uncle, who she claims was the former head of her family. Mayor explains that her uncle is head of the family estate, which is worth 25 million euro. Of that 25 million, Mayor will inherit 5 million. Mayor says her uncle is close to death and his estate is being divided between her family. However, the other members of her family are not too keen on Mayor inheriting her share. Jonathan recalls Mayor telling him how her family perceives her as a black sheep. To them, Mayor's moving to the United States, getting a regular job, and thinking independently forced a wedge between her and the family. Jonathan remembers how Mayer painted a clear narrative depicting herself as a creative maverick juxtaposed by her uptight aristocratic clan. It's unclear whether or not Mayer meant her story to affect Jonathan so deeply, but it did. When Jonathan came out to his family, they disowned him. Since then, Jonathan has not been invited to any holiday celebrations by one side of his family. After hearing Mayer's story, Jonathan developed a connection with his new friend. He assumed they were both the black sheep of their families and allowed the empathy to bring him closer to Mayer. So close that Jonathan considered her family. Jonathan describes the trio eating dinner almost every night, even after Mayer moved into a new building. Naturally, since they spent so much time together, Jonathan and Mayer told each other everything about their lives, including Mayer's job at a travel agency. Mayer told him she worked for a travel agency in LA, but Jonathan noticed she didn't spend much time there. He recalls Mayer bragging about how easy the job was, and he assumed Mayer only worked at the agency to make extra spending money. However, Jonathan would later find out the real reason why Mayer worked at the travel agency. Mayer explained to Jonathan that she landed her easy-breezy job at the agency due to her family's connection with the business. Ever since Jonathan had known Mayer, the self-proclaimed Irish heiress had been showing him text messages from barristers and family members in Ireland to prove her story. Jonathan saw plenty of texts and emails to get emotionally involved and actively invested in Mayer's drama. According to Mayer, if she were to be convicted of a felony, she would forfeit the inheritance. Jonathan put two and two together and explained to Mayer that her family might use their connections at the travel agency to accuse her of some type of workplace crime. Jonathan says that he had seen enough news stories about husbands who knocked their wives off for $1 million insurance policies. However, Mayer did not heed Jonathan's warning and continued working at the travel agency. Sure enough, Jonathan answers a frantic call from Mayer. The agency has accused her of stealing $200,000. The phone call came from a local jail where Mayer, who brushed off Jonathan's warning as far-fetched, was desperately looking for someone to bail her out. Jonathan didn't hesitate to fork out $4,200 to get his best friend out of jail under the assumption she would pay him back upon her release. She trusted that his rich friend would pay her debt, and she did. As soon as Mayer was released on bond, the supposed Irish heiress paid Jonathan back in full. From then on, Jonathan's trust in Mayer was firmly cemented in his psyche, at least until the trial. After bailing Mayer out of jail, Jonathan felt like a knight in shining armor. He felt determined to help his friend defeat her snotty family and claim the €5 million inheritance that was rightfully hers. But if victory was to be obtained, Jonathan had to help Mayer win her trial. Before any court dates were set, Mayer jumped right back to normal life, moving into a new $6,000 per month apartment building and restarting their fun-loving relationship. Despite Mayer's best efforts, life would not normalize itself so easily. The $6,000 per month apartment proved to be an irresponsible choice after all of Mayer's income stopped coming in. Nevertheless, rent was due, and Jonathan, still enveloped in his chivalrous mindset, was more than happy to lend Mayer some rent money. Shortly after the $6,000 loan, Mayer came to Jonathan with a 5-figure request, $54,000. Mayer explained to Jonathan that she needed some money to pay her legal fees, with most of the funds going towards hiring a top-notch attorney. Jonathan rode in on his armored steed with $4,000 in cash, $50,000 worth of credit cards, saving the day yet again. At this point, Jonathan found himself $60,000 deep. Plan was for Mayer to pay Jonathan back when she won her trial and became eligible for her inheritance. According to texts and emails provided by Mayer, the trial was going well until Mayer got arrested again. Tear-filled eyes, Jonathan listened to Mayer tell him why she was in jail. The judge presiding over Mayer's case found out she paid for her attorneys using Jonathan's money and sentenced her to 30 days in jail for money laundering. However, Jonathan lending money to Mayer is not illegal, nor is it money laundering, but Jonathan doesn't know that. All Jonathan knows is he wants to visit his best friend. However, during their phone call, Mayer adamantly tells Jonathan not to visit her in jail. Her reason is embarrassment. She doesn't want Jonathan to see her in jail. Out of loving defiance, Jonathan decides to visit her 2 weeks into her sentence. Then Jonathan logs on to a city website to schedule a visit. He first has to find and select which inmate he wants to see on a kiosk screen. He looks up her jail profile, which includes basic information like her name, age, and criminal info. Mayer's crime should have been money laundering. Instead, Jonathan found himself reading the word grand theft felony. Jonathan says he felt heat rushing over his body as he realized his friend lied to him about the 30-day money laundering sentence. Jonathan left the jailhouse and went into detective mode. Former TV reporter sifted through case records and discovered that $54,000 had paid for a different kind of legal fee, a plea bargain for a 6-figure embezzlement. Mayer had actually stolen $200,000 from the travel agency, and she pled guilty to it. Prosecutors negotiated a deal with Mayer, spend 30 days in jail, cough up some cash, and the state would forgive her. In the plea bargain, Jonathan found out that the $54K he loaned to Mayer was used as part of the plea bargain with prosecutors. He also learned that only $40,000 was necessary to meet the bargain requirement. requirements. Jonathan spent the rest of the day crying on his husband's shoulder. Once the shock wore off, Jonathan knew the next step was to confront his Irish friend with the newly found truth. Jonathan picked up Mare from jail on the day of her release, pulled up in his car, pressed record on his phone, and led his former friend into the passenger seat of his car. The conversation began with Jonathan revealing his newfound knowledge and Mare tearfully denying his accusations. Though their friendship ended, Jonathan's interest in exposing Mare lingered. He began an investigation, starting with her social media. From there, Jonathan found other victims, including his own landlord, who told Jonathan that Mare was $12,000 behind on rent. The landlord revealed Mare's excuses to dodge her payments, like claiming she needed to pay for cancer treatment. As the investigation went on, Jonathan noticed similar patterns involving cancer treatments and equally bizarre lies. Up to that point, Jonathan's investigation was beginning to stagnate. Then he remembered he had access to Mare's AOL email account. Jonathan logged in and jumped to the con artist rabbit hole that is Mare Smith. He discovered many of the email addresses she had shown him were fake, including one Jonathan believed to belong to actress Ashley Judd. But most importantly, Jonathan found out how deep Mare's scheme ran. Mare had many aliases and hair colors to go with them. While scouring through her social media, Jonathan found Mare wearing various disguises, each one coinciding with a different name and story. He also dug up evidence that Mare had been through several plastic surgeries to alter her appearance. Jonathan uncovered 23 different email accounts, each belonging to a fake cousin, fake persona, and several fake celebrities like Ashley Judd. And though talking to other victims, Jonathan learned how Mare used these personas to lie about being an heiress, a hockey player, an Irish mobster, cancer patient, and other fake identities that existed online and in person. As for the Irish heiress story, Jonathan discovered Mare did indeed have Irish ancestry and even lived there for a time with her stepfather. However, her lineage was relatively normal, not a drop of royal blood to be seen. Even before Jonathan made these surreal discoveries, the victim turned vigilante attempted to charge Mare with grand theft using treachery as a means to commit the crime. January of 2019, 6 years after they met, Mare was found guilty of grand theft and sentenced to 5 years in jail. Jonathan had spent around $20,000 on private investigators and hours of his own time gathering evidence to convict the person he loved like a sister. Despite his successful conviction of Mare, Jonathan is still pursuing extradition for a mortgage scam she pulled in Ireland years ago. If Jonathan's extradition to Ireland succeeds, Mare's time behind bars could be extended much longer than anyone expected. Jonathan is currently producing a 6-part documentary detailing Mare's career as an international con artist. Initially, Jonathan's doc was supposed to be a regular 1-part. After his investigation, Jonathan unearthed 45 corroborating stories from other individuals who have been scammed by Mare. The film will ideally tell the story of her victims to thousands or even millions of people. Because of the film, Mare, or anyone like her, will face a more informed community. Click here to watch one of these next videos.